Brad Johnson, 1030, Orcharding Part 2, Oak Room.
But usually it's because I can see the tree. If there's too many leaves, it's hard to see. And then the other thing is, this may put myself in the prune a bit, but we're being advised now to not prune it before rain when it's wet, because we get more. We're seeing more disease infection, and the wet weather tends to foster that more. So some styles we're using now, we start in October, as soon after harvest, anytime after harvest, and then more in the spring. When the sap's starting to move up into the tree, we get less infection because they're saying that as the tree's going dormant, that bacteria and stuff will lodge in the tree more, or draw it in, or whatever it does, versus when you're cutting, when the sap's moving and you cut and it's pushing, it tends to be less infectious.
Do you whitewash the areas that you prune?
No. Although now they're saying, hey, you need to spray that because with some of these infections. But yeah, so I carry a little spray bottle with me because on my young trees, I have seen some infections. And so I use a parasitic acid and I just mix with like a 1% or whatever it is, and I just spray it on my shears and I spray it. I don't usually, unless I see the tree's infected, I'll spray after each cut. But if it's not, I just spray between trees.
Mr. Johnson, it's already recording. It's ready to go.
Okay.
And do you fertilize like all throughout spring, like through the whole growing season, like once a month? Or?
No, I usually fertilize in the spring, and then I do some amendments in the fall. So primarily, probably before July, and then after harvest. Yeah, then I put on maybe more amendments like gypsum or various. That's a calcium sulfate. Calcium and sulfur is something we need in our soils more. So. You wonder if baking soda is good for something? Oh, Epsom salt. Well, that's probably certain minerals it needs. Like maybe what's in Epsom salt? Magnesium or something like that? So I would say I usually draw some leaf samples and some soil samples, and now they're even doing sap analysis, so you can take the sap of the tree and it's a little more fine-tuned in terms of what the trees are needing and getting, and then what's another one we're doing is I've done some of those, but so then that just gives me an idea of what my trees, because sometimes your soil says one thing, your tree says another. In fact, my soil sometimes say something, and my trees are still getting it. They say, well, I'm low in this, my trees are okay. I'm thinking, well, okay, something, I don't know. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm thinking to do what you suggested is to graft other varieties because I have an Alberta peach.
Okay.
And so all I'm going to do is get all the fruit in like one season.
Right.
I love the idea of like prolonging your season, but I don't have so much of space to plant 3 trees, 2
Yeah, so that's a good idea. That's what I kind of have some trees like that in my backyard, and I just put several varieties on it. Yeah.
I can't remember the variety, but I haven't got any fruit of them. I just planted them last year.
So it would be a good time to graft, because I like to graft onto a young tree before it's big, and then it's got more push to that main limb, and then because it's hard to do it when it gets older. You can do it, but it's so. What I would do is take that plum and put something else on it.
Okay.
Yeah, if you get some new growth out of there, and I'd use a little whip graft and put you need some wood from something you like and put it on there. Of course, it's got to be compatible. I'd say you can plant peach on plum, I think, and you plant almond on plum. But usually I just grafted the one I'm growing. I've grafted some peach on almond. Just depends with what type of roots. Yeah.
I don't have walnut, but I have a pecan tree, and I just started getting fruit off it.
Okay.
And it's exciting to have like nuts in your
Yeah, for sure. Good for you. You keep.
I had no idea. Like you had to wait for the green to get brown, and
Yep. And then the squirrels come in and help you out.
Exactly.
Blue jays. Yeah.
Do you use any kind of foliar spray if you find the twist?
Yeah.
It doesn't really
Yeah, we've done some of that. I'm not as avid as that as I used to be, but there's occasion I'm trying to think, and so I'm, let's see, what would I be doing now? I've tried a lot of things. Say for my prunes, for example, if they're low in potassium, they might, if they're set a heavy load, and I feel like then I might use we use a potassium sulfate, real fine water soluble type, and we'll sometimes add something to that. We use some fish. I tried a new fish emulsion this year that we foliar sprayed on our trees, and then we're usually adding a little bit of sugar to that. So we're using sugars more than we used to, and that's been advised to us for a lot of our things we're doing. Pretty much sugar in everything. We're adding sugars. It's a kind of a new deal, but anyway, yeah. So yeah, we're doing some. Depends on what they need. We might, if it's just a shotgun approach, we might add, if you put a kelp in there or something like that. Usually, most of that's done. I do most of that now in my transplant mix, bacterias, but we've used some foliar bacterias too, and so the foliars more are biological controls, like some of our biopesticides that we're using. There's bacteria in there that we're using for blights, for the walnut blight. We use a foliar for that, but it's not so much a nutrient. But you use something here?
Yeah, I got a question about sudden tree die-off. You've been experiencing any of that, where it happens right above the graft when a tree is well established, like 3 to 6 years old, and kept watered. You cool the root system. There's no evident bacterial attack or anything else like that. And oftentimes, right after the top dies off, you'll get shoots from below the graft line.
What kind of trees?
We've had it happen to apples. We've had it happen to peaches. A number of things. So it's a cross species.
So it's not brown line, because brown line will come in. It looks like just right. Maybe it's at the graft union, just kills it right there. We get so I'm not real familiar with that, but that's one thought that comes to my mind.
I'm up in Washington.
Called brown line, and I don't know if you do a search on that, or I would probably check with your farm advisor, your extension office up there. And when I've had that experience in my fields, it's a bacterial canker or Cytophthora. It's a biological bacteria of some kind, and it will. What's crazy is I don't know if it would be the same thing in your case. We can overcome that better with a peach root stalk grafted a plum onto a peach, because our plum root stalks, for some reason, they're more, even though the root comes back, the top is more susceptible to that bacterial infection. It'll kill the tree, because that tree, that early on, that picture you saw, you saw that tree just dead, and they'll come back from the root. And I'm thinking, well, I'll just graft you again, but they'll have the same problem. So what we're doing now is we're going to a peach root. The problem with the peach root is they need sandier soil and not so heavy. So we're riding a balance between heavy rains, soggy soils, and peach root dying for that versus dying from a plum root dying from a bacterial infection. So that's my experience.
So you called it brown what?
Brown line?
Brown line.
I've heard that. I'm not sure if that's...
Now, when you look at brown line with the root or anything else like that, you're not going to see any noticeable effect down in the root, right?
That's what I'm thinking, but I don't know. I don't have the experience in that area to really tell you. I just kind of what I'm having trouble with on mine. So I'm going to a real vigorous peach root, and I'm grafting a French plum onto that and that'll, from what I'm finding, all my trees that I planted on peach root are doing better than on plum root. I'm not having to die. They're not dying out like they used to be.
You have it on cherries, you have it on apples mostly, but you have some other things.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I'm putting in this 819, which is Bacillus subtilis, or some of these biologicals into the soil to try to increase my biological activity in my ground and maybe enhance or mitigate the problems of if it's a bacterial infection. The other thing is, there's, like I was talking to this other little girl here, they're saying don't prune because it could be carried by your in pruning cuts. and infections at the rainy season. And so they're saying
Oh,
don't. So there could be, that could be passing it from tree to tree.
We try to sterilize stuff, but yeah.
And so they're saying, well, and which we're not able to do. They're saying, well, go in and spray it with a fungicide after you prune. Well, if you're going to run a big crew, say you got, so you're going to prune, you can spray, I don't know, whatever size, say you're going to prune 20 acres. Well, that'd be more like what you could spray in a day. So you're not going to prune 20 acres unless you had a big crew. You might take you 20 guys, And if you have a big crew, you can do that.
So you're saying like spray your copper stuff after you prune?
Well, the conventional guys are, I don't know what that's probably what you'd have to use, or maybe there's some of these other biologicals. I mean, I'm going to show you a picture in this next slide of a lot of the biological materials that I'm acquainted with, and I've used some of, and what their functions are somewhat. But you'll have to go to those labels. I'd write them down. You'd have to go to those, or you can, because I don't think I have them on the list here. And so write them down, and there'd be some in there that might fit for you, and there's probably others. So unless you have a PCA, if you're doing, pest control advisor, maybe they have some advice. And I have to, on my case, since I'm doing organics, I have to, some of these young kids coming up, or even the older guys, they don't want to mess with organics. And they don't really, but more and more the university's doing more education on some of these biological systems, and we're seeing more coming from the chemical companies that are, or it's not just them, but they're the suppliers, they're the mode from that's distributing them, and so now there's some newer things that are coming in that maybe you would talk to your PCA or somebody in your area that says, hey, and I would think your extension office would be the one I'd start with. Just that some of those guys, you have to educate them yourself. Like I've done organics since '75, and so we didn't have a lot of these things when I started, and so it's been helpful to me. But at the same time, we've had to kind of learn off from the seat of our pants, just how to do things. And a lot of these other guys just educated by books, and they don't necessarily go in the field like you are. But I would I'm not maybe giving them enough credit, but I'm just saying, check with start there and your suppliers or whoever, yeah. Because I don't have all the answers. Yeah, I'm going to deal with that next. So pest control, some of that next. So how are we on time?
You got about 4 minutes.
4 minutes. I don't want to go out and carry this thing out. So, yeah.
We appreciate you sharing with us.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. That's why I'm here. I don't have any other, I'm just like you guys. I'm just saying, well, here's what I do. You could probably tell me a lot of stuff.
We know the failures at least. In orchards, we failed at everything. So we're looking for better solutions to brown rot and stuff like that.
Yeah. So brown rot, you asked about brown rot. We're going to talk about that. Now, I maybe not getting, I thought about that last night when I woke up in the middle of the morning. I thought, oh, yeah, I've got a slide about brown rot. What do I do about brown rot? And it's sometimes the time frame to cover here so fast, the depth of that might be that, because we go to seminars and we have a speaker, that's all they deal with is brown rot and the solutions and infections, the cycles and what's going on. And so you get an education there. You say, okay, now I know all those aspects about brown rot. And in my case, I'm taking that information and I'm saying in my years of starting in organics in 1975, the farm advisors would laugh at me and my, what are you doing? And so, but once I understood the cycles and kind of got educated, then I could take that information and say, what can I do in my realm of organics? If you're doing conventional, you've got a lot of tools. And I'm not disparaging that. I'm just saying, I'm not saying, hey, you got to do it this way. But you have a lot of tools available to you to deal with some of those problems that we don't. And so now there are new tools that are helpful, more biologicals and that kind of stuff. But it's also cultural, and maybe I'm getting into more than in this case, than I would when I present this. But since you asked what to do about brown rot, we had, in my years of growing prunes, I'd say probably in the 80s, I forget what years, we had some seasons where brown rot was terrible. It looked like, you'll see a picture in here. It looked like they'd taken a torch and went out there and just burned the flowers. Just went, and they were just, it was brown rot. It wasn't, and you wouldn't, unless you knew what to look for, you'd think, because I had people ask me, how come I'm not getting any apricots on my tree? And that was my first question. Well, have you looked at the bloom, at bloom time? Because that infection gets in right at green tip. As soon as that green tissue comes out, you got to deal with it. You don't wait till you get fruit on the tree. You're too late. And so they were losing all their blossoms. So they weren't getting any fruit. So and then you deal with varietal types. I went to my neighbor who grew organic peaches, and from tree to tree, we could see he was a grower, organic peach grower, is incredible. But from peach, so he would work with the brown rot. But from tree to tree, you'd see an infection, and you wouldn't see it on this other tree. So you had even species, certain types are more susceptible than others. So those are other aspects you'd have to kind of put in your mix to say, how am I going to deal with this? Is this the variety to grow? Or maybe you shouldn't even grow it. If maybe it can't grow where you are. That's just, anyway. I'll just rattle on if you talk to me too much. So I was going to get into something else, because these growers that had the prunes, back in the 40s, they had a brown rot, same problem. And they've been spraying for it ever since. But they didn't have the problem every year, but it hit them so hard that one year, they just said, okay, we're going to prevent this every year, regardless of whether they have it or not. And that's what happens in some of these things. Your conditions are right, and you get the infection, and you get hit hard, and you don't know if you're going to get it next year. So a lot of these controls are just preventative. And now you can do that in some of these things that I do. I try to do preventative things too with organic methods. And there's other things that are happening in there, I'll try to get in here a little bit, that I think are more nutritional, could be. I don't understand all of it, but that's kind of our ideal, like our bodies. Hey, if I could have perfect nutrition, I could never get sick, Well, that's not always true. So anyway, are we ready to go again? Yeah. Okay. So this is my next slide. So this is, so spraying and pest control. In the winter, I take inventory of what materials I have and plan to order what I may need. I calculate amounts and costs and calendar them as best I can. I consider any changes and improvements for my orchards and consult with advisors about my plan. Who is the guy with my advisor? So you got some problems. You say, well, I go talk to these guys. And I attend trade shows and educational seminars like this one. I service and maintain equipment. I have a running list of notes and ideas to plan and consider for my operation. So here's maybe a little bit of some of what I do in particular. I may be missing parts of this, but I usually apply a delayed dormant organic 440 oil spray to help control scale, aphids, and mites. Delayed dormant is close to and before the bloom at green tip, because the sap is moving into the tree and there is less chance of burning the tree with oil, and the insects are more susceptible to control. So as they start to emerge and they're more able, you can get more of them, and it seems like their bodies are more susceptible to some of these things. During popcorn stage, or about 5% bloom, and full bloom, or about 10 days apart, I use a small amount of oil, about a 1% solution, and a bacteria, BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis, for PTB, or that's peach twig borer. This is for prunes. Now you'll get OFM, Oriental fruit moth, in peaches. So that's another one. And peaches will come bloom at a different time. And I'll kind of maybe try to get into some of this. I'm also trying biological materials for blossom brown rot fungus. These are natural components, some of which are fungus, bacteria, and viruses that are detrimental to some pests. So here you can see the names of a few of these and can do your own research to see if they are a fit for you. Some of these are preventative on my part. This does not exclude my longer-term plan of soil and plant nutrition and cultural practices to provide a way to take care of and minimize these problems. Certain insects are monitored by trapping during the season. to give us an indication of what the populations are, when they are hatching and flying, and find out what may be going on in the field with certain pests, more so in our walnuts. But I wanted to bring it up because it is applicable in many crops for many pests. Codling moth, peach twig borer, oriental fruit moth, navel orange worm, husk fly. I will get into this a bit more later, but it starts in late winter. Late winter meaning, so maybe I'll address this first. I'll talk about these other items. But late winter meaning right about now or early February, we'll start putting these in the walnuts. And the primary thing for, in this case, well, it used to be peaches. We would start with, because I'm talking about, so if I talk a little bit about pheromone, if you're all kind of acquainted with the pheromone disruption. So pheromone disruption is something we use. It started back when we started doing peaches back in the early 80s. We were doing research then, and we were experimenting with oriental fruit moth, which the difference between on a peach, you get oriental fruit moth, it goes right to the pit. Peach twig borer, they're the one that usually see flags to your peach tips, and they'll get it. It's the twig borer. It gets in the twig and it flags, it dies, and those will those will just kind of play around on the outside of the fruit, but they're starting in February, so you're trying to figure out what their cycle is right at the beginning. So with codling moth in this picture, where I'm putting a codling moth pheromone, similarly, we try to find our first catch, and that's your biofix. And then from there, you're measuring degree days, over 45 degrees, the cycle, they'll go through a cycle of temperature. You measure your temperature over 45 degrees, and you can measure their next hatch, generally when they're going to be hatching. And I've seen that with codling moth. When the university, they put a monitor booth out in our orchard, and we could go out there and just punch, for each insect, we could punch their little readout on there. It would tell you how many degree days you had at that particular time. You could say, okay, right when I get to about 600, the codling moths are going to start hatching. You could almost nail your next spray if you're doing chemical spraying. You could know when that's going to hatch. Well, in this case, we're at least finding out if we don't put a fair amount out early, they're going to already be fertilized. They're going to start their next generation, have fertile females, and they're going to start multiplying in the field. So you want to get that fair amount out early before they start mating. And so that's going to happen when they first hatch out of that little hibernacula. And that's the same thing with on our twig borer. What we're doing on prunes, we're doing the same thing at bloom time. So we're at popcorn stage, and at 10 days later, we're putting on that BT, because that BT is the bacteria that infects that caterpillar, and they come out and start feeding on the leaves at that time, and it's going to affect them, and they're going to die, and it'll reduce that population throughout the whole season. If you're putting on something like you can't use these materials anymore, but that's why the chemical deal works really well, because you can go out here and you say, okay, I've got codling moth, I've got scale, I've got PTB, I've got OFM, and I'm going to put on one spray early on in the dormancy. I'm going to take those out all right at the beginning. I'm not going to have any trouble the rest of the year. And a lot of times that's maybe safer in some cases, because now the commercial guys, they have to go in, they don't have these strong materials. So now they're going in and they're spraying here and they're spraying here and they're spraying here. So you're spraying throughout the whole season. So maybe I'm arguing out of both sides of my mouth here, but that's what happens, So you have to control them early to get, and all these other ones you got each individual thing. So if you're going to put out a pheromone it's all a different pheromone. You got a pheromone for PTB, you got a pheromone for codling moth, you got a pheromone for OFM. Each one has a different application or a different smell, and you got to put all those out instead. So in my case, I'm mainly dealing with PTB, and since I'm not doing peaches as much, but plums are PTB, and then this is a codling moth. So that would be in apples, but it also gets in walnuts. So I'm hanging this tool right here. I hang up early in the season. It's a little aerosol can that's in this little computerized thing, and you hang it up there, and it'll puff out a little bit of this pheromone at a prescribed time, at midnight for 4 hours. I forget what it is. Every few minutes, and it'll just put a little puff out, and it'll shut off in the day, and just at nighttime it'll go back on, and just keep that out there. So in the summertime, that confuses the mating habits of the calling moth for my walnuts. And so there's anyway, that's what I'm doing. So we put that up in the tree, and it's maybe like I don't know, in 1 to 2 per acre or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is. So that's just one item on this list here to kind of go into the pheromone confusion thing a little bit. So that's what this trap is. Now I have an apple tree. I have some apples up near my house, and I'm going to tell you some of the biological side now. Hopefully we won't run out of time. But I have an apple tree that's way off from my house. And I put I had a PCA said, I'll bring you out a male and female pheromone and a trap. And so I put that in that one tree. And that they were attracted to it, but they come in and they get stuck in the sticky, whatever it is, like those little mouse traps, sticky traps. The insect gets stuck in there, and typically you'd go in there and you'd count. And you'd put a calendar time on, you count you can kind of gauge the cycles. In this case, I was just trying to catch them so they wouldn't go anywhere else. And that's what I did, and I didn't get any worms in that tree. So that was a good thing. The ones up by my house, I have a huge amount of bats. And the bats fly at night, and they feed on all these various insects. So that's something I'm going to get into a little bit more. In this case, I'll just kind of try to briefly run. This isn't everything, but these are different types of things that I've used that I didn't used to have available. So a lot of these are essential oils. You got thyme oil, you've got orange oil, you've got cedar from the cedar tree. This one has some garlic oil in it. But this also has clove oil. And so these are for different purposes. The PFR 97 is a bacteria. You got to keep it in the refrigerator until you use it. Dipel is a bacteria. Serenade, I think, is a bacteria. Double nickel's like a bacteria. Pure crop's an oil that's a really refined oil that's, I don't know if it's refined, but it's gone through some kind of process. This has been really effective. I'm using, I don't use all these all the time, but I've tried different things. Pure crop's the one probably I'm working toward now. Double nickel for blight. Nordox is a copper. This organic sanitizer I use for disinfecting my packing lines and belts and bathrooms and stuff. But you can also use this as a disinfectant. You can kill, who was asking about curly leaf? You can kill curly leaf with this, and there's no residue. It's oxygen and hydrogen. It's actually hydrogen peroxide and acetic acid. Hydrogen peroxide and vinegar, and it kills bacteria and fungus. So you can use that just as a killer, but it doesn't leave anything. So the downside of that is you don't have any residual. Like say if you spray a copper with some kind of a sticker to hold it on the tree, you'll have a little more long-term effect of that over time. And so that's and then of course this is I talked about the 819. That's a Bacillus subtilis. This is seaweed I use in some things. Regalia is an extract of some kind of pigweed that's used as a fungicide, something for brown rot. There's another material I don't have on here. It's called Blossom Protect or something like that. So my PCA, I've got a young guy that's come up through, I don't know, how old is Tyson? Maybe. Anyway, he's a good advisor. He's learning the organics, and he's interested in helping me with all this stuff. So he goes to more seminars than I do, and so he's coming back and say, hey, look at this. What about it? So he brought this one to me, Time Guard. Hey, have you heard about Time Guard? So this is a new one, because I get thrip in my tomatoes. If you deal with thrip, but thrip has kind of gotten where it's gotten more of a factor, and they also transfer a virus from the flowers from outside the field, and we lost a whole tomato crop one year from a virus. And so we started controlling our weeds outside our fields, because it comes in, they first come in on a flower, they get on garlic and onion, and so then they get in your tomatoes and they suck the juice out of your tomato. And they carry it, they're a vector, so they'll bring the virus into your tomato, and then pretty soon your plants are declining, and so we had that problem. We got ahead of it, which I was pretty glad we did. But so anyway, there's a window of conglomeration of things that I've worked with, and I've been pleased with some of the new things that we've come up with to deal with. This one here has been helpful for walnut blight, and so these two, this one, and this one are probably 3 things that I've been using for walnut blight, and I hopefully I get ahead of it. Sometimes one year I think, I'm doing something right, and next year I'll get hit, and I'll think, well, maybe not. So as things wake up and dry out in the spring, I begin chopping brush, mowing down cover crops, applying fertilizers, and plan for my first irrigation timing. The first irrigation sometimes is the most critical depending on weather, and eventually will set the pace in the calendar, plus or minus, for irrigation. Especially in these drought years, we had to really calculate our water and didn't want to put anything on too early, and so we had to really watch when we're... So this is just a little mower we set up on the front end loader, and it kind of helps keep my berms clean. It's like a big glorified hydraulic lawnmower, and it does a pretty good job. But initially we chop with a bigger chopper. These have some big blades underneath. You're probably familiar with those, because we don't normally, if it's trees, down tree we'll push out, but most of our brush we just chop and leave in the field. So with many years on the same soils and testing with instruments like a pressure bomb, that's in the photo there you see on the left here, that measure exact tree needs, and using evapotranspiration rates for plant needs based on weather, as well as physical soil testing with tools like this hand auger, we've determined generally when to irrigate. There is a variance in scheduling water with the water district, and there is a range of irrigation timing that is not perfect. There are critical intervals for water to avoid fruit cracking and water stress for the tree to have good fruit development. In my case, for my area and this crop, having good moisture in the soil at the end of June and July are important. These are growth stages for this crop. Depending on your system, you can fine-tune your tree water needs to very precise timing. I can give you general information. You will need to do your own research, but I believe the information is there. In California, we have evapotranspiration sites that measure water use in real time for grass, and then it is converted to a crop or a situation of different types. For drip irrigation, you can manage the crop needs for every day if desired, and put on timers, which is what we do for drip systems. For more information, there are websites where you can plug in your own data and make calculations based on your situation. This can give information on irrigation and also controlling things with phone apps for timing at your fingertips, if you want to get that sophisticated. Fresno State University, right here just a few miles away, has an extensive irrigation research facility, the Center for Irrigation Technology, CIT. If I have used their research and irrigation tool, which is the website, I don't know, it said they're working on it, so I'm not sure if it's available. WaterRight, it's in the handout here, I've got the address. waterright.org, and it has been very, very helpful. I put in my data and evapotranspiration station and can get a close idea in real time how much water my crop is using every day or week. It's been especially helpful in my vegetable irrigation. So this just shows you, this is an instrument we use. This guy came out and helped me. He had the tools, and we made it pressurizes the leaf in this chamber, and it gives you a pressure reading of what stress the tree's under and how much that tree is needing water at that time, and you can measure that over time and get to where you know where to irrigate. This little tool here we use. So we use both of this and this and this. And this, it was funny to me. You dig up the dirt, and they actually have if you look it up, they have a process. You can tell exactly, not exactly, but it gives you an idea of the thumb test of dirt, how you can read your moisture just on a thumb test. So you dig up the dirt and you thumb test it, and it kind of gives you an idea. I never really realized that. I just went out there and did it, and then they have this whole thing that tells you how different soils can tell you maybe about how much moisture is in there. But in this deal right here is what ATO station. So this measures grass use all over California are these stations. So I picked the one nearest to me, and then you can go in like with the WaterRight website from Fresno State. I go in and put my parameters in. You don't have to do it from their website, but like for my vegetables, I put in my soil type, my irrigation type. I'm putting in, of course, the one factor they didn't have was I'm using plastic mulch, so that changed the dynamics. But you can, and then you read, it gives you real-time use for that crop. You have a crop coefficient, so it translates their data to corn or to for the grass. It translates to corn or to trees and the stage of growth they're in, and you get real close to what water it's using every day. I could dial in my tomatoes after a while you get a feel for it. Where I realized then after a few years, I just put on 2 gallons a day. After my tomatoes got to a certain height, I just set my timer. I said, okay, and then I'd set it for 2 hours a day. And it would go on it, whatever time I programmed it to. Putting on an acre, that's 12,000 gallons an acre. And so if I'm doing how many acres, I just say, okay, there, I'll run it that long. And then I could, with the drip tape, I could measure exactly 2 gallons a day. And then you read this station, it would tell you in past history, it would give you future history, but it also could tell you real time what it's using. And so then you can dial that in real close. For tomatoes, heirloom tomatoes, I felt pretty critical because then you could try to mitigate your cracking. We try to reduce our cracking in our tomatoes. And so that worked pretty well for that. And so you can use that type of tooling to give your water, figure out your water needs. Now, this kind of gets blown out of the water when you go to flood irrigation and we just open a valve and we push the water down through the field. It's like, hey, there you go. You know, I can't really measure. I mean, I'm not saying that's totally true because even now we have just out of a irrigation valve, they measured how much water based on the height from the canal to the field and the height of that bubble coming out, how much water you're putting on because we don't have any meters. Yeah, which I'm glad, but it's like anyway. So with my vegetables, I could tell. So real time, I could tell if I'm putting on my water on my vegetables, and I go out in the field in the afternoon and they're just starting to wilt. I knew I need to bump up my irrigation a little bit. They weren't getting enough. So this is a little bit about animal pests. Considering animal pests. Some are gophers and squirrels. That's just a few. These are a few controls I've tried and used. Traps, gopher blaster, cheetah machine. I don't have the gopher blaster in this picture. That gopher blaster is a mix of propane and oxygen injected into the hole, and you ignite it, and it blows up their hole, blows up their run. You've probably seen some of those. We have that tool, and we tell you some stories about that. Anyway, we don't use it now, but it was pretty violent. Is your
house still there?
Yeah. Well, I had a guy at work for me, and he loved to use it. And one time, how far away? We're probably, yeah. And I heard this thing go off, and it rattled us. I thought, whoa. It went kaboom. And I thought, we all ran back to make sure he was okay, but he was having fun. Yeah. So, the first time I used it, here's what happened. I had a hole in the ground. We dug a hole. We're putting a post in. It's a pretty big hole. But the gophers, you know how the gophers are. They'll look for any hole they can dump dirt in because they don't want to push it uphill. They just want to dump it. And they started. So there's a hole on the side. And I thought, well, I'm just going to plug it in there. And I plugged it in. And I charged it up. And I lit it off. And what happened was that propane or whatever, the hole was deep. And it had sunk down inside that hole, and it blew up. And it kind of startled me because I thought it was going to go into the hole, and it went into this big hole. And I lit that whole thing off, and that was, anyway. So that's just one of those things. So a cheetah machine, that's another one or you can use your own motor, lawnmower, lawn edger, or with an exhaust pipe attached. Poison bait, if you choose to use that. So there's a bait tool you'll see. Not all these methods are approved by organics, but I'm including it for your information, for your home garden, or in case you want some alternatives. Flood irrigation with my dogs was used for the gophers on the bottom left. I have more aggressive measures I use at times for squirrels and English sparrows, if you want to ask me about that later. Also a tool with a drill. So if you get a lot of gophers, a lot of conventional guys, there's a tool that puts a tube in the ground. Back of your tractor, it's like a planter, but it runs a tube under the ground, like the gopher, and it runs a tube and it drops the bait in there. And the gophers are territorial, so they'll come in and look for that hole, and they'll find the bait for a whole field. Like you just drive down the middle of the row and just plant bait under the ground. So that's conventional side. So you may be familiar with some of these things. The Maccabee trap, gopher trap, if you're not familiar with that, that's just You put that in their run, and it actually has a little flap that they push when they come to fill in the hole, and it grabs them around the middle, kills them. This cheetah machine is actually something I thought about making, and then I saw somebody already made them. It's like a little leaf blower that takes the exhaust and runs it through and runs it through where the air is, and it pressurizes the hole, so it actually pressurizes the gopher hole with carbon monoxide. This is kind of a little homemade style you could probably do just with a metal tubing and doing the same thing. This is a light little machine you can move around. Gopher bait, that just has a little reservoir up here of bait, and it has a tube, and you open a little hole. Once you find their run, if you use these, you can press around the hole. You can feel where the runs are, and it kind of gives a little bit. You drop a little bait, and so that's how that works. You know, you have a little rod up here that releases the bait down the bottom, just in little tiny pellets, and so you can go around and find their holes that way. They just die underground. You never see them. This is a live trap. You're probably familiar with these. There's another squirrel trap that's a live trap that's a one-way door. You can catch, it lays low to the ground, about this square, and you can just have a one-way drawer on both sides. You put bait, and the squirrels just go in, and they keep going in. You can catch several squirrels at a time, that kind of thing. This is, there's a guy asked me earlier here, Greg. He's had a lot of squirrel problems. This death trap is probably one of the most effective ones I've used, and it seems fairly specific. I've only caught a skunk in there besides squirrels, and that was a mess. But you know, we have squirrel problems, and one of my fields we got about 10 of these traps, and we just set them out. You know, whether the squirrel is going in or out, it trips that little tongs right there. You have to reset it, of course, and then it's a body trap. So for ground squirrels, not tree squirrels. Yeah. So ground squirrels, and whether they go in or out, it'll catch them because they trip that trip, whether they're in the hole or coming out, or they're out of the hole and they're going in. And then you just got to go back and check because the other varmints like coyotes or whatever come around and pick them up and haul off your traps. Same thing with these. You need to nail these down because you got cats or whatever, they'll come in and pretty soon you won't have any traps. So you got to nail them down. What else on that? Anyway, yeah, this is something works really well. I like this really well because it kind of gets them all at once. In the early spring when we flood our fields, we just kind of walk the fields in front of the water, and it drives them out of the ground. We can get them that way. Take my dogs out there with me. So that's a little bit about that. I talked about the gopher blaster, which I don't have a picture of that. So in regard to fertilizers, I prefer a high-quality egg-laying chicken manure, dry or composted as a fertilizer because of the balanced nutrients and high protein content. I get compost from a company called Perfect Blend. Though a compost blend can come with downsides if you're needing more of some individual nutrient and not others because it comes as a package. I have this situation because some of my soils are high in phosphate. Not being tied to an organic market rule in this case may be of benefit because with conventional fertilizers you can often pinpoint your nutrient needs and have a clean material to use as a remedy. I think used well, judiciously, scientifically, this can be a good option. When fertilizing with manures, I apply manures using the 90 or 120-day rule before harvest. That's the organic rule. We also use our horse manure and store it in the summer during the no-apply months for later applications. That's what I use I store it later and I use it for my tree planting operations as my dressing and my prepping in the fall for my trees. I personally am working with the more biological processes in my farming to accomplish my end results. I also have been having some good results using cover crops. Results come at a slower pace with not being able to fix something as quickly. I take soil and leaf samples and use university science research as well. I get calculations of what I think is needed for the plant and soil needs, and with the recommended materials and rates, along with my own ideas, within my budget, I make applications starting in the spring and early summer. Something I find helpful to put not micronutrients or smaller amounts of nutrients recommended in this process is apply these as I spread compost. I have found it difficult to apply small rates of recommended minerals, so when I am applying my larger bulk materials, I calculate my minerals to be applied and then put them evenly on top of the larger bulk material, and it sloughs off in the proper amounts as I'm spreading the compost. So if my spreader rate is 3 ton per acre and I need 20 pounds of boron per acre, I put 20 pounds on top of the compost for each acre I spread, rather than trying to make multiple trips spreading small amounts of each thing. I put this in last night, so this is, see how this, my personal farming for dummies idea about chicken manure and calcium mineral application. Okay, so in general, I'm building my soil biology and mineral balance and fertilizing for future crops, not necessarily crops for that winter, for that year. I have worked toward following William Albright, the University of Missouri, and Neil Kinsey's agronomy, kinseyag.com. And recently I've been experimenting with some of the processes by a company called Soilworks LLC. And I've got some websites if you want to look up their stuff. He's got some YouTube things. And I've found this rather fascinating. So he's refining the process even further than some of these earlier things I talked about with calciums and microbes in the soil. So I like what he's doing. There are lots of incredible natural biological processes taking place, and this is one of them. So you may wouldn't recognize this, but this is my walnuts. So here's a line from where the water flowed and where it didn't. This is dry ground. And this is all worm castings. And I'll walk in my fall when I'm putting, after I've all this cover crop and stuff that's on top of the ground, I've worked it in the summer, it's down to a dust, pulverized. Because I get through walnut harvest by taking all my cover crop down to pretty much nothing. So we can have just a bare floor. And then all that dust and organic matter is being taken in by worms. So they come up and they feed, and as I walk across my ground in the fall after irrigation, it's crunchy. Crunch, crunch, crunch. That's all worm castings right there. It's kind of fascinating. So as you see those things happening, that's pretty kind of just, it's neat to see these things working together. So this just kind of describes, like if I'm putting my bulk material and I've got 20 pounds or whatever, if you're putting iron on or some of these recommendations you get, I just I'll put it all in there together. So if I want to put on 40 pounds of one and 20 pounds of that, I'll just spread it right on top of my spreader. And then as my compost goes on, it just takes it on as I spread it out, same rate per acre, whatever I want to do. This is some gypsum. And then here's one of the upsides of having organic stuff is, you get a lot of worms. You want to go fishing. So we got some pretty good fishing around our area, too.
Brad, can I ask you about spreading it between the rows?
Yeah, so the question is, I'm spreading it between the rows, yes. Versus not spreading between the rows?
Yes.
You mean around the trees? Well, I try to get it tree to tree. But these spreaders sometimes, that's 28 feet, and, it'll throw it out there. It doesn't maybe show it in this picture, but it'll kick it out. The dust is, of course, fluffing up in here, but it's kicking it out. You can't see it. Maybe not quite as heavy because it does come right out the back the most. But I try to, if I could, I'd throw it from this side clear to the middle of the other side. And from this side clear to the, and so, yeah, that's what I'd try to do, but they're not just slinging it as far as I'd like. This is 28 feet across here, and so I try to get it out there, but it's not.
So in other words, you're fertilizing everything.
I try to, yeah. Yeah, the downside of fertilizing my berms is because I don't get a lot of water up there, so it's not as apt to get taken in as easily. That's why you see this. If I spread it up here, the worms aren't going to get it as easily because the water's not there. They don't go up there as much. So I don't mind missing a little bit in here, and I don't mind missing my berms a little bit because that's where I don't want my reeds to grow as much either. So the roots are all out here. They come all the way out. You go down and they're just thick in there.
And this just percolates into the ground when you flush or irrigate water flooding?
Yeah, you're asking about if it percolates into the ground when I water. Well, yes, and that's the benefit. So one of the things I didn't mention here that in some of my fields I have a huge population of night crawlers. And the benefit of night crawlers is they come up to the top. I've dug down their holes to try to find them. They'll be sometimes 2 or 3 feet deep in the soil. But they come up at night and they feed out. You watch them. They'll feed out. They'll stretch out. They leave their tail in the ground. It's kind of wide like a cobra head. And so it holds them in the soil. So when they reach out, they're just, I have some pictures I didn't put in here. They just feed out and they bring all that debris back to their hole. And you'll see it that's just piled up right around them. And then they just start taking it down in. So they'll clean up. That's the benefit of all those worms and the night crawlers. And that's one of the things in my organic system. I thought, how am I going to do this? I'm putting all this stuff on top of the ground. But I'm not tilling it. So this night crawler and the microbial activity, that's what's helping me take all that organic matter and using it back in my cover crop. So this cover crop you see right here in the after harvest, it's not there. Before harvest, I take it down. It looks like, if I can, I'll make it look like a tilled field, but it's all mowed. And I set up my mower so where it takes it down to nil. And then all that comes back. So this is after a rain, and it's all coming back again. That's maybe I'm not getting this. Is my next slide? No. So my cover crops are part of that system that I'm trying to work to kind of enhance the biology of the soil. So this is just the summer time, mowing, irrigating, more pest control. That's what I'm doing. July is when I take leaf samples and soil samples to measure plant uptake of nutrients and plan for future plant health. So this is planning ahead for that time I showed you early on for my fall. So I'm trying to figure out, not in the fall when I'm doing my nutrients, putting stuff on. I'm doing that now. I'm saying, okay, I'm pulling my soil samples. This is July, and my leaf samples. That's when the most maturity of those leaves is, and it shows me what's going on in the field. The other things is just, of course, we do some field trips. Here's a little girl come out and help. We had the school come out, and they're picking watermelons at my place, and this is my grandson enjoying the water. So that's a little bit. So mowing, cultivation, more mowing and cultivating in the summer. My cover crop, I'm just got to figure out if I'm doing okay on time.
11:10, you're fine. You go to 11:30.
Okay, so some of my mowing and perennial. So this is some of my mowing and perennial cover crop. This is an interesting phenomenon of dormant seed. So I planted dormant seed, and I had planted an orchard of prunes in 1990, and I planted a cover crop in there. And after 25 years I pulled that orchard out. After it took, Bermuda grass took over after a while in that field, and I took the prunes out say about 20 years later, and then I planted vegetables for about 5 years, and then I went back to prunes, and this cover crop came back up. So all this seed had laid dormant from that early cover crop years, and it came back on its own, and it just came back solid when the conditions were right, and I had my new orchard in. It sprouted new clover, and it just covered that whole field with brand new. This is perennial clover. Now, my walnuts, I use an annual clover because I want it to go to seed and I want it to die and reseed itself. So I wait. My walnuts, I let them grow. Walnuts look pretty rank and nasty in the spring because I let them go to seed. And then that cover crop goes to seed. This perennials like New Zealand and strawberry and whatever types of clover, it just stays there. And so my prunes, I don't care because I'm picking those off the tree, not on the ground. So this is a picture of some irrigation. So we typically just open a gate on the canal and it bubbles out into our field. We open a valve here and it floods down through the field like alfalfa. In this case, this is one of that grass hay we planted. So we just ran up, pumped it out. We ran into a gated pipe. And this is that laser leveled field. So you can see the water runs nice and smooth and level. And so we just run the water down. This is sprouting this grass hay. So we were just sprouting the grass, getting the hay to grow. Sometimes we use siphons to siphon across the ditch. So this last year we were cut 50% on water in California. And so we had to get creative, and we actually started pumping water and moving. We had to move sprinkler pipes down every row, and my grandkids came to help me, and they got paid to move pipes, so that they made some money on this deal. And that was kind of good for them, but it was kind of a tough. So irrigation, I know I went through this a little bit already. It was very critical. Even though I can't plan this perfectly with the water district, it's something I work on pretty thoroughly to get my water right. So in this case, we ran pumped and ran sprinklers, which normally we just flood this like that last slide. We just open the gates and let the water run through the field right down through here. This year we had to move pipe and move pipe and move pipe and move pipe. So some more pests. Aphid is one among others. Some of these pet problems don't show up every year. In this case, the problem with spraying an oil or something like that on these at this point is you must hit them to kill them. You can see I sprayed these and it hit them, killed them. This is the same leaf. But the problem is sometimes they'll be up curled over and you can't get them. So you might get some of them. It might slow them down and allow the beneficial insects to take time to catch up. And though newer biologicals like the ones I talked about may be helpful in a different way to control these, I've worked with some of these and have mixed results. So best of all, I like beneficials because they go where the bugs are. And in this biological process, I'm seeing much more of this taking place. And I'm not always intervening, but watching and observing and allowing them to do what they can. To take more aggressive measures, to take more aggressive best timing control, I'm going back to my dormant spray timing to understand if I can do something to solve this better at another time. And then going farther than that and reviewing my fertilizer or cultural practices to see if I have a cause there, because sometimes my imbalance of fertilizers can cause these other problems. In using dormant oil, this is one of the questions I'm asking. In using dormant oil, do my rates or timing need to be adjusted? Did I change something from before? Are my fertilizer rates and plan correct? It may have been just the right conditions for one particular year, and one way I've seen this, if the problems I have are widespread and many other growers in the valley, which is in the case of 2018, they had the aphid problems also that year. The other years, this was a smaller occurrence. So the next years gave me more indication of what was going on. So now it's 2022. I did as above, reviewed my timing and applications, readjusted back to what was effective before, and so far since 2018, I have not had the same problem with aphid. I still wonder, is it what I do or certain conditions that make the problem show up? So everybody else was having this trouble, but this was a bad problem this year. I tried to do everything I could to control these things, and it seems like they still gave me headaches. So this is a mealy plum aphid. It'll do pretty big damage to the plum tree. There's another one I don't worry about so much. It's called a leaf curl aphid or something. And so these are, if you don't know what these are ladybug eggs. Right here you can see ladybug eggs and the larva. So that you can see where they cleaned up this leaf already. So these are good workers. I mean, they do a lot of work, and they go, and there's other ones too. So these lacewing, they're really helpful. And here's, you don't maybe can see this very well, but right here, this is a parasitized aphid. And there's a wasp that comes in and stings those, lays their eggs, and will parasitize those aphids. And they've cleaned up a lot of problems for me. And I'm kind of getting into that a little bit more as I move along here. Yeah, so they're little tiny cells on that. It looks like one spot in there, but I don't know if you can see that or not. Here's another one right here. So they're all stacked up in little pillars, and those are ladybug eggs. So this.
And they kill your aphids?
Yeah, the adults and the larvae will feed on aphid, and they do quite a bit of it. So here's a trichogramma wasp. So these are some things that help us. Trichogramma. This is a really small. So you see that's the aphid. And it's laying its egg or stinging it, and these are used as a host to raise their young. And these are all mummified, so it killed them all. And then, of course, you got the same thing here. And ladybugs, here I'll talk about lacewing first. So this is a lacewing, and this is how they lay their eggs. They put them on a little web. It stands off the plant, and that's to help from getting cannibalized and also from predators. And so you can see those. You'll see those just stacked up on your plants. And so we see natural populations of these now. We used to plant these. And now sometimes we'd go up to the mountains and go camping, and you could find these in swarms. And so we'd go up the day before, find the swarms, take ice chests, go up and harvest the ladybugs, put them in the ice chests, bring them back into the valley. We'd put them in our cooler, our big cooler, till nighttime, and I would take like a sugar water, or maybe like a 7-Up or soda pop, and spray it on their wings. Put it in a bottle and spray it. Try to stick their wings to their body so they wouldn't take off right away. Put them in the trees at night so they crawl the trees and stay there, and try to get them to cycle again and stay in the valley, because they'll go up like this. This is what they look like in the mountains, just big swarms in the leaves. You just pick them up in piles. You just pick them up with your hands. Of course, you wait too late in the day, they start to fly and crawl, and they bite, and so they can hurt you. So anyway, we try to get up early in the morning, go camping the first day, go up early in the morning, and then harvest and bring them back. And so that's one some of the beneficials. Now here's some more. So these are all other ones that are helping me and helping all the way. Did you see? See, you didn't see the lizards. Did I talk about the lizards? Oh, here's one I missed. So here's this was in my greenhouse garden. I've never seen one this big. This is a California garter snake. It's huge, and so it's hiding in my beets, and I just left them in there. But those are feeding on things as well. Maybe not the ones I'm particularly. They're feeding on frogs too and toads. I like them to eat that, but I figure they're beneficial. And the lizards are my daytime ground feeders. These eat a lot of bugs. There's huge populations. Yellow jackets, they forage for worms in my tomatoes and all kinds of things. So a lot of times you don't like these, but they're foragers for insects. They're good beneficials. This is a group of swallows that comes in every year. This has been my lifetime here. Swallows come in, they nest underneath the bridge, and so I'll show you this picture here. Where is it? Does it show? How come it's not coming up? I thought I had a video that turned on here. That's weird. This thing frees up on me. Here they are. So you see them flying? So they're just out feeding, and those are my day feeders. They're feeding on insects during the day. And then these are some other ones I explained already. And here's my night feeders. We put up these bat houses. These will hold maybe 600 to 1,200 bats. And then, of course, places you don't want them, they're there too, the bats are. But they feed on insects at night. And we get these big swarms that feed, and that's where it helps, I think, control my codling moth. And, of course, we have owls. We put up owl boxes. I don't know how good they do, but we put them up anyway. And they feed at, nighttime. And my grandson here with some worms. Toads. So toads, they feed a lot. You would be surprised. So this is a toad turd. And these are smaller toad turds. And these are lizard turds. So all the lizards have this little white spot on them. And these are bats. So you walk out, you think, well, what are these big old turds out here? So you break them open, and they're just full of bugs. So they're feeding, this is a toad, feeding at night. You think, that couldn't come out of a toad. But sure enough, it's about as big as your little finger. You think, wow. But they're feeding at nighttime. The lizards are feeding at day. And then one night I was out irrigating, and I'd never seen this before. It just was a new thing to me. I saw all this, since I used a headlamp, I went out and there's glitter all over the ground, just glitter. I thought it was slug slime. You know how slugs make a trail? But I went down closer, and it was spiders. Hundreds and hundreds of spiders. And their eyes were glinting back, reflecting back. It was just like, I went to another field, same thing. And so these are natural spiders. If you were in a conventional system, using a pyrethroid or a sauna or something like that, these would kill these things, wipe them out. And so you would never have those. And you wouldn't see, and they also kill these and frogs. So you wouldn't have any of that benefit in your system outside of the organic system. So, and then some of the problems, more pests. These are just examples of some things to be aware of and contend with on prune trees. I've had fewer problems with these as the years go by. I have already covered some of these things I do to prevent these biological and soil practices. We talked about some of the soil stuff I do and some of the biologicals. This is the brown rot I was telling you about earlier. So these, it almost looks like in some springs, if you get a bad case of this, it looks like somebody took a torch out there and burned your blossoms. This starts at bloom time. As soon as the tissue starts to come out of the tree is when we start working with that, trying to control that material, control that fungus. And this will happen. This is too late. Be on your fruit. Twig borer, you see those, that gets in the twig. We talked about using BTs for those to control that on peaches and plums. This is your mite, your spider mites with their eggs and the little tiny spiders. These are real tiny. This is what they are. Look like this is some of the damage they'll do. They'll create a web, and we've had this in eggplant, huge amount in eggplant. The way we dealt with eggplant, because we couldn't get a spray to. We were picking a lot of eggplant. We did a lot of eggplant one year, several years. We would just sprinkle irrigate. We'd set up our sprinklers out there, and the change of environment tended to change the habitat of what the spider mites. They didn't like the humidity and the moisture. And then we would cut. I'm kind of getting off topic. We'd cut the eggplant off. After we had our first crop, you could produce 2 crops in a summer with eggplant. We'd cut them down about that high. After we picked our first, and they would rebloom, produce another crop, and the second crop didn't have mites. Go figure. I don't know. Somehow the later crop. And here's another fungus that gets on the main scaffolding. They're doing research on try to figure out what to do with this. So this is some of my walnut about walnuts. So other pests includes walnut blight, walnut scale, calling moth, navel orange worm, housefly, aphids, mites, and crown gall. For weed control methods, I use mowing and burning of weeds. Animal pests are gophers, ground squirrels, blue jays. I'm not very tolerant of various varmints that destroy my crops. As I showed in a previous slide, besides good soil management for pest control, one of the first needs is to control bacterial blight. And control starts at the prayer stage. Now, that sounds a little funny, but this is really what they call it, the prayer stage. And so right here, when the shoots emerge, they look like praying hands. You can find all the dynamics and scary stuff about walnut blight on a web search. Essentially, copper and various other things are recommended to control blights. I currently use various types of controls, such as double nickel, Nordox, 750WG, Serenade, Regalia, applying spray beginning at the prayer stage if needed. And like with the prunes, it's at the early bloom time. Crown gall is another bacterial infection that causes gall on the crown of the tree, which causes weakness and possibly kills it. So you don't see this on the gall. Because normally it's down here and it's hard to control. It gets on the gall. It's a soil. It kind of gets infected from the soil. This is in my field. I didn't take care of this early, and it's actually going to destroy the tree. I've taken some new shoots off the bottom that I'm going to regraft, and then I'll just cut this off. But typically, if you see this is an air gall. This got in there probably when it got grafted. Either the knife got put on the ground or the sign wood got put on the ground, and it picked up the bacteria, and it got into the graft union. And a lot of times you'll just see it show up from planting time, but the tree will get wounded, and that bacteria will get in here, create a big old, pretty soon it looks like a big old black burl right around here, and it'll take over the tree. What we do is we cut that off. We cut it with a chisel or a hammer and a chisel, and get it clear back to clean bark. Burn it with a burner. I take a little propane burner. I just burn all the way around that cut, and I'll spray a little alcohol on there. And then this is typically once you get all the gall, it'll heal over, and pretty soon that'll close up, and that wound will close back up again. So that's something you got to. And some of these new rootstocks, I kind of get into the other session there, that helps prevent their developing, helps more resistant to crown gall. So this just gives you a little overview of that. I monitor for walnut scale with a 2-sided sticky tape wrapped around the trunks to catch the scale crawlers as they emerge. I then spray a light oil, currently pure crop, because your other oils like my 440 can burn the leaves on walnuts. It's walnuts are more susceptible. So this pure crop oil doesn't burn the leaves, and it works pretty well for the scale. So I spray that about 3 times at 1 week intervals. If I can, I will combine my blight spray with my blight spray. I have a local farm service PCA monitor with sticky traps and pheromone attractants to measure insect pressure for calling moth, navel orange worm, and housefly. I monitor for aphids and mites by walking the field and looking for infestations. For calling moth, I'm using the calling moth pheromone puffer to prevent infestation, and for navel orange worm, my main defense is crop sanitation. So we talked about the calling moth puffer. We talked a little bit about the blight, and this scale here is a little insect you're probably familiar with. There's all kinds of scale. This one is walnut scale, and it's underneath the list. They're little tiny things about the size of a pinhead. They have a little capsule over the top of them. That's why you call them scale. This is uncovered scale. Pull the top off of him. And these things walk around at certain times, and they get stuck in this tape. That's when we know they're moving. And that's when they're most susceptible for control. And that's usually in May in our area. So we try to control them in May. That's the housefly. We put up a trap, a little yellow sticky trap, and they stick to that. And then we use a bacteria. It comes from the soil, but it's been colonized and used as a biopesticide. It's called Entrust, and we mix that with a molasses, and the fly is attracted to the bait, and they feed on the bacteria, and it kills the fly. So that's kind of that, and that's how we try to control the navel orange, the housefly. That's housefly. So this is what housefly does, and that's what you were talking about. There we get into your, and this is what it looks like. So then we have the scale, and we got the navel orange worm. So navel orange worm is another one that gets in the walnuts and almonds. So I usually, the only thing I can do about that in the organic system is try to get rid of all the walnuts that are left over after harvest. No real good sanitation. So I take I pick everything I can. I take a big water-filled roller, and I'll run up through my field, and I'll try to smash all the walnuts that are left in the field, or mow them. If I can't mow them because of my cover crop, so I just try to roll them down and crack them, so then they'll break down and the worms won't stay in the walnuts. So that's kind of my main, and we try to just clean them up, pick everything we can, and get everything out of the field, and because they'll hibernate in there, they'll reinfect, they'll come out next year, and then you got another bigger problem. And the more you have, the more you get. So calling moth, we kind of talked about that already, the pheromone thing. So let me just, this is it's not going to stop. So I'll tell you about this first. So this is how we harvest. So we run a harvester, runs on both sides of the tree, and our shaker, this is shaker side, it reaches out and grabs the tree, shakes it, and then this is the receiver side. So the fruit rolls down to this side, and then this long pan will lift and dump the fruit on the conveyor, and then it runs it back up through the fan and blows the leaves out. Sometimes we put a fruit sizer, drop the small fruit out, and then we just go from tree to tree, shaking the fruit off. This kind of shows you how it works. These are offset weights on a shaft that hydraulically driven, and it just kind of oscillates the tree. And then it's on a pad with a slip sling so it doesn't skin the tree. And then we just run through the orchard like this. We have another machine that comes behind and distributes the bins and picks them up. It holds about 6 or 7 bins. It's called a bin carrier, obviously. And so we take them out from the field to the roadside. And so, but this just shows you that we sugar test. So we try to pick our fruit 25% or above sugar, in terms of bricks. And I've seen everywhere from 18 to 30 as far as sugar content. So if the pressure gets too low at harvest time, there's no reason to wait to pick, because it's all going to start dropping on the ground. So once it gets below a 3 psi flesh pressure, there's no reason to wait to try to see if the sugar will come up anymore. If it's high pressure, we might wait longer to see if the sugar content will come up more. But sometimes the aspect is the dryer space. So since all commercial dryers, we have to find a place in the dryer to get it to dry them. So we can't just say, well, we're going to pick at the perfect time. We sometimes pick when the dryer schedules us as close as we can to harvest. And so that's part of the deal. So to talk a little bit more about, we're out of time here. So anyway, this is harvest, after harvest. So we dry them on these trays. It goes in the dryer. They put them in tunnels, and they dry in about 18 hours. They come out looking like this. They come down from a 3-to-1 dry away. So in terms of weight, so the green weight might be, 3 pounds. We come out with 1 pound of prunes. And of course, just to load them on trucks. And then we grade them by size. Every fruit gets graded by size. So everywhere from, say, 100 count to a 25 count per pound. We run them across a long grid, and it drops the fruit through holes. And then they fall into the bins. See, this is a 42, 45. So the 42 to 45 prunes per pound in this bin. That way, when we take them to the pitter, the pitter has all uniform size that they can put in the pitting chuck, and it fits in perfectly, and they shove the pit out. If you had all sizes, they couldn't do it with all the different sizes. So, and then we can grade them based on what we can pit and what goes for juice and what goes for cattle food. Because if they're too small, they're just skin and pit, and they're no good for eating for people. So that's kind of the process of doing that. It's more involved than just a few words here, but we're running out of time. So I have some samples to give out. I've got the whole with the seeds in them, and I've got pitted, and I've got some walnuts. So maybe let's sit over here, and I'll just I got a few more slides, and then you can take, and I've got handouts, and you can take some samples of our pitted prunes and our walnuts and our whole prunes. So they're kind of separated in there. I think the walnuts in the middle and the whole prunes. The whole prunes are our best fruit because they're the biggest. We can't pit them, but they sell cheaper because they go for juice. So I like them as a dried product. You stew them up. They kind of make a nice flavor because the pit kind of melts. It kind of gets the flavor into the fruit. And my wife likes them just like this. I like them stewed. But, so then the next slide is what? Back again, starting over again. So let me go to our last slide. So to conclude, in the spiritual realm, it is said, "Behold the Lamb of God," to have a pattern to follow and develop into a Christ-like person. Similarly, having a goal or picture of making a tree or orchard requires a vision or pattern to follow as well. I say this because it helps to see ahead of time what you want to accomplish. What do you want your orchard to be and look like? What is the result you want, and to keep that in mind. You may be thinking about growing and developing an orchard, and one of the thoughts I've had in this, that in this process God may be thinking, a way to develop this person. I say this not because I totally understand it, but because I think it is true. In this process, we day to day get to look at God's creative power and participate in it, and He with us. Some of the words I read to think about a few things God has in mind for us in the new earth and to give us something to look forward to is this quote in Isaiah. "And they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people, and my elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands." So that's kind of what I've got. So we're out of time, but I'm glad to take questions if you want. Yep.
What did you spray on for the aphids? Did you have the
That was, I probably just grabbed something out of my arsenal, but it was probably I'm trying to guess what that might have been. It would either be because if I was spraying a 440 is what I used, or organic 440, which is a mineral oil. So any of those oils will get them. There's other types like, what's this other new one that's called Pure Crop? The orange, the Oral Boost will kill them. That's an orange oil. These are all kind of desiccating. I haven't used neem oil that much. I've heard about it. I think occasionally I've used it. But Pure Crop is another one I've used. These are just mainly suffocating oils. And if you go to a neem oil, I think it's like azodactrin. Or there's a real more, as far as organic chemical control, there's probably the most potent, if you call it potent, is called Azera, which is a cross between a neem and it's a mix of neem oil and the chrysanthemum flower extract. It's a natural pyrethroid. And so those, if you're really getting serious in the organic world, those are some that people go to to knock things down. But they're very mild compared to your conventional stuff. I mean, so yeah. I don't know if I got that question on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Any comments on foliar fertilizing? I think that's how you say
So
it.
any comments on foliar fertilizing? On occasion I'll do that. Like my prunes, if I feel like they're low in potassium, you can use a fine grade, water grade potassium. Is it potassium sulfate? But yeah, it's a water grade. That's been the main thing that I probably used a foliar for. I've used some fish emulsions. A material I just started using is called Jaws. It's a fish emulsion, and occasionally I'll use that for various things. And I used that one I showed up here was excite seaweed. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Can you spray the BT at any time you see the worms or whatever? Or
Yeah, it needs to be when the worms are feeding. Okay. Yeah, because the worms have to ingest it. So I use that for my corn earworm. So I use it out as well. Yeah, and my tomato hornworm. Those, yeah.
If you ended up with an orchard over what you found out was a very high water table, how do you deal with that?
So the question is, if I had an orchard with a very high water table, what is high?
Like 6 feet below the surface?
Does it stay there all summer? Do other things grow there?
Yeah.
What else grows?
Well, since we put in compost, just about anything we want.
So if it's growing and you don't need to water, I think that's a plus.
Well, the problem is if you want to deal with pests.
Oh, you mean you can't get on the ground?
Well, yeah, I've been afraid to spray certain things on our fruit trees.
Because you think you might get groundwater contamination?
Because we drink from that ground. We have a well that goes down.
So are you using stuff that's going to hurt you?
No, we've done everything organically thus far.
So you're probably okay. I mean,
things like BT, I've heard of
well, BT has been, I think, used as a GMO graft or genetic. So that's where they've run into problems, where they've actually put it in the genetics of the plant to kill worms. In this case, it's not. It's not going into the plant. And I don't think it's where it's it's staying there. You might have to do a little more research, but I don't think it's a problem. I can't think of anything other than right now California is making us monitor. They're making us pay to test our wells for nitrates, and so that's one thing that they're concerned about.
What do you use as organic nitrogen?
Well, we use the composted chicken manure or dry manure or the horse manure, and then we're using some foliars with like the fish emulsion. But our primary is, and then we cover crops, all those kind of together, cover crops and some manures and compost. Yeah, and I kind of do calculations based on what I think each one is contributing to the system, to get my numbers. Yeah.
Cover cropping. So when you put your cover crop in initially, it
Yeah.
sounds like you're doing it you plant it, and these are perennial cover crops always, are they?
Both. So when I put my cover crop in, I put in both, depending on the crop, was perennial for my prune blocks and annuals for my walnuts. I don't know if that's what question.
I'm doing apples.
So I use it because I'm trying to sweep walnuts off the ground with a sweeper. So they go right on the ground. We shake them on the ground. We sweep them together in windrows, and then we're picking them up. So we want that. We don't want a lot of. And if we get a rain, then we got all that tangle of debris. So we're trying to get a pretty clean floor. For apples, it's like my prunes or peaches. We're hand picking, and we're using ladders or a machine, and we're not picking off the ground. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. And the perennial stays there all year. It just kind of regrows and keeps coming back. Yeah.
We've got apples and pears in the mountains of Montana, and we have spring water and free. So sprinkler irrigation, what pros and cons of sprinkler irrigation?
So you want to know what the pros and cons of sprinkler irrigation. Well, you're probably talking to the wrong guy. I do sprinkler irrigate, but it's not a habit. It's not something I have a system for. And so but my personal opinion might be that, yeah, you could maybe have trouble with putting water in your trees for, at least in our case, they tell us don't prune when it's wet, so the growth of that moisture and maybe would cause you some problems with fungus or blights but I don't know, but, are you were asking if the water's any good for your orchard because it's spring water or?
Like fungal problems
Yeah, well, what I would do to prevent that is just don't sprinkle into the tree. I'd keep the head of my sprinkler low. I wouldn't put it up into the canopy. I just keep it low. You get a low profile sprinkler, so you're not irrigating up into the tree. That's what I would think, you know. So you're just irrigating underneath. Yeah, so, yes, more questions.
I have a pear tree, and this is our first year of having trees. And when the leaves were first coming out, they, like almost soon after they came out, started to turn black. Then they came out, and then the flowers came out. I'm like, okay, maybe it's going to be okay. And then the flowers went away.
Yeah, my first guess is blight of some kind, and that's what we contend with, like in the walnuts. In fire blight, it would be, and you know, there's materials you can use that are stronger, but we're using coppers and biologicals for that bacteria, and you could do a research on that, but if you just want to look under fire blight, one of the resources I like is University of Davis in California here. And they have a really good website. And they deal with a lot of backyard type stuff, you know, smaller scale things too, and commercial. But then they can give you some, maybe more, rather than just the words here, you can maybe look up, and because you're going to have to get in, if you want to get into, in my case, I talked to my PCA, which is my farm advisor, my pest control advisor, and we know, I'm kind of educating him and he's educating me, but some of these biologicals are new materials that we're using to help control some of those things as well, and you might look into those if you don't want to use like a conventional material.
We had another one where the 10 feet down, it just started dying from the top down.
Yeah, sounds like blight. Yeah. And you don't want to transfer that, so you want to cut. If you're going to prune it, I clean my shears, and with a disinfectant, and I cut clear back into clean wood. Don't just cut off so like one year I had that happen, and I just took it off at the trunk, and I let new wood grow back out, and I started a whole new tree, because it had taken down most of the tree, and it cleared back to the trunk, and I tried to find good wood. So I took it clear down to where I had new wood, let new shoots come out, and now I had a big tree, and a few more years I had a big tree. And then you had to control your blight also, you know. So you're burning the blight, and that doesn't. You don't have to. Doesn't.
I mean, once you cut it off, we don't just.
You take it out of the field.
We take it out and we burn it.
Okay. All right. So another question. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask about fire blight prevention.
Okay. Well, see, we're dealing with blight and walnuts. Kind of went through blight in this deal because last time some people had questions about blight. I think you're going to, as soon as that. So maybe what I mentioned to you is you got to start with that before that comes out. It's just like your curly leaf. If we're not putting on a control for curly leaf, that leaf is coming out and it's getting blistered as it emerges. So you got to get the bacteria off that tree before that curly, it's just like your blights. As your green tissue comes out, that's where your infection starts. And so you need to control that before that green tissue, or at least as it's there. In peaches, you know, if I don't get my copper or say like my peracetic acid on early or whatever you're going to use, before that, I've got some early peaches. I go out there and I think, oh, you guys are already leafing out. And they're already starting to look a little blistered, you know. So sometimes you got to do it. You know, I had an organic grower that didn't have any any curly leaf, and I couldn't. It was amazing. He was doing some stuff right. So anyway, you had a question?
When you plant the tree, is it okay to put like a soybean meal or something in for fertilizer?
Yeah, if you plant the tree, is it okay to put soybean meal or something like that? Yeah, you know, I know some people are pretty. They don't want to use any animal products, and so that would be one that's people use sometimes. Alfalfa meal, soybean meal, those kind of things. I think, you know, that could be I don't know a lot about it. I'd probably look, if it was me, I'd probably look up and say, okay, what do I need? What is soybean meal giving me? You know, I like egg-laying chicken manure because it comes with a full balance of minerals, and that's what my emphasis. I didn't tell you this. I kind of alluded to it, That's my farming for dummies. Because if you look at an egg chart, if you ever go to a feed store, there's a feed store in there, they have an egg chart on the wall. And it shows you every kind of deficiency in that egg in different pictures. And they've labeled every kind of mineral that chicken needs to produce that egg. So I figure, okay, here's my little amateur view. Okay, they're getting all the minerals I need to produce an egg. If I do that for my plants, it's not going to be perfect, but probably they're going to get most of what they need. Otherwise, I'm going, okay, my leaf analysis says I need cobalt, and I need... I'm thinking, where am I going to get two tablespoons of cobalt to put them on 30 acres, you know? So all this, those minerals are, those, you know, so that's my... And then they've got calcium because it's egg laying, so I'm getting eggshells, and then in the compost I use, they add the mycorrhizae to it. So I'm getting that mycorrhizae, which is a symbiotic relationship with my roots. It gets established on the roots of my trees. I'm putting that in at planting time. Boom, those roots got that bacteria, and that's going to grow with the roots. And so that's going to attract all those nutrients and everything to the roots. Anyway, somebody else had a question. When I use oil, do you use a sticker with it? I use this new oil I'm using, which is Pure Crop. It's like makes water wetter, but so does Oro Boost, but it's not a sticker as much as a spreader. There are stickers, but I think the oil is kind of a sticker on its own, but I'm using these other materials to kind of make it penetrate better. The Oro Boost or the oils we use it has certain emulsifiers in it, but not as much as a conventional non-organic oil because they can't use those in the organic system. But it does blend with water, but it'll separate. So we use an agitator when we put it, but it turns white, so you know it's like, okay, put the oil in there. It's like, okay, it's mixing, but then we keep it agitated. So one of the reasons I knew if I sprayed a heavier oil on my trees, I could control aphids, because my belt on my agitator broke one year, and I just about doused my whole tree with oil, and I didn't have any aphids on it. So I knew if I went with a heavier concentration of oil, I could probably control my aphids better. And that's when I knew if I could time my oil sprays better, or if I could check, if I didn't put my oil at certain timing of my oils, I could control my aphid better. Anyway, go ahead.
My apples seem to have on again, off again years. Is that typical for apples?
I don't know. You might have to talk to an apple grower. I know it's true for pistachios and what olives, and so it could be for apples. I've got certain peaches that are that don't set as heavy usually at certain times. Prunes can be that way, but usually I've had a real heavy crop and we just sapped that tree from one year to the next, and we didn't thin it very good, and it just took a lot of injury from the tree. Then we'll get a low crop the next year usually. But apples, sometimes it's cyclical. I don't know.
Every other year.
Sounds like these guys know every other year on apples. Okay, so there's some other people here saying, yes, that's true. Anyway, let me take hers.
So the bat houses, did you build that, or is it a bought?
Yeah, so you're asking if the bat houses, do we build them? Yes, we built those. Now, those are those are a little different modification because those are double houses. The plans we had a single side, half side. We built them into a gable roof rather than a lean-to. So we and they're specifically for bats because you have ventilation and you have compartments because they're a mammal and they brood their young in there and they want to move them around to different temperatures. So you have to have spaces in there in this case, that's what we did. Spaces they can move them. They like the warmth, and so they can move them around. They get ventilation. There's side cuts in them and stuff like that.
How long did it take you to get them living in there?
So I will tell you, we made a mistake by making them too white. I thought, okay, I'm going to paint this thing white because I didn't want I wanted a good paint on there, but we needed a warmer color. And so, yeah, to get them to move into the house, I have one house they have not moved into yet, and I don't know why. I've tried to figure out ways to do that, but I haven't figured it out yet. So there's a bat expert at the university. You can talk to her forgot her name right now. Yeah.
I came in right as we were talking about the whitewash on the base of the trees.
Right.
And so I see in your pictures, I don't know if this is your crops, but I have read things that are positive and negative to that, but it sounded like you were encouraging the whitewash on the bottom of the trees.
Yes. So you're asking about whether to whitewash or not, or wondering whether you should. I used for organics. We found out that we can't use latex paint. One inspector came by and kind of told us we couldn't do that. So I make my own paint. I use a Surround, which is a brand name for kaolin clay. It's just a white clay, and most whitewashes are made from. A lot of paints are made from that material. And then you have to figure out what kind of sticker you're going to put in it. New Film P is an organic approved sticker. It's from a yucca plant or something like that. I can't remember. Maybe it's not the same material. But that's a material that actually helps that powder stick to the tree. And then don't put it on before the rain. If you have a rainy season, you're going to have trouble. You have to paint it more often, or figure out a better sticker than what I'm telling you. Or just use. If you're not certifying for organics, just get a latex paint. Use that. Yeah. Don't worry about it. You know. What? No. Well, you don't have to. But yes, usually it comes in pretty thick. And in our case, our hardware stores supplies 5-gallon buckets of whitewash paint. You just use it like it is. But yeah, if you go on your shelf of your thing and say, well, this one's a little bit yellow. I got all that cream-colored latex paint. Yeah, I'm going to use that one. I mean, you can use it doesn't have to be perfectly white, but, sunscreen.
Thin it down with water.
Yeah, it's probably helpful, I don't want too thin because you want it to, it's thin enough that you can paint it on the tree and it flows good, but not so it just globs on there probably is, My dad used to thin at 50%. We'd put half water and half. So you got 1 gallon, you'd make 2. That's what we did usually. But I don't know if that's scientific or not. So is that, anybody else got anything you want to ask? Otherwise, we can go to lunch, I guess.
The tree breaks off from the snow, because our trees now are all gone anyway, because we got 4 feet of snow on top of it. So I know they're going to be broken. We had that happen to a cherry tree once, but new branches came out below the breakage. Is that going to produce a different kind of tree?
If it's above the graft, no. If you can know where your graft is, then if it produces below the graft, you're going to have a rootstock. If it's above the graft, you can turn it into the same tree. You got to find that union. I want you to be sure and get some fruit. I know some people left already, but take this with you. And here's some handouts that you can take. Just a little bit of a few things on there, yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Thank you. Just try to get some of these out here. Thank you. Yep. One's pitted and one's whole. So some have pits in them. Those are the big ones, and then some are whole. You're getting the best of the best right here.
It's very kind of you to
Yep.
share with us.
Yep.
Is it okay if we take one of
Yeah. Take one of each. Yeah. Take one from both sides and one in the middle. You'll get all of them.
Have you had success with guinea fowl eating bugs? Is that something you really use?
Geese. I've had geese and goats and sheep, but not guinea hens. We used to have guinea hens on the property when we first moved there.
Is that right?
Yeah. So the people who owned the property had guinea hens. I use those in my kiwi. Yes, they can be a problem.
Oh, I was thinking that.
So these were sheep. We had, I think it's Barbados sheep.
Okay.
But the males were just really rowdy, and they started killing my male kiwi. They would just start hitting with it. So yeah, Geese were okay, but they started trying to grab the fruit, you know.
We have experimented with guineas now, and it has taken our bug
Okay.
level down.
Wow.
Quite a bit.
Wow, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Big.
Very dramatic.
Are they loud and rowdy?
Yeah, they are.
They are.
Yeah.
They're loud and rowdy.
Yeah.
It just depends on what you, I mean, there's a payoff to
Yeah.
everything practiced.
Yeah, that's right. People say, "What? I got deer." I think, "Well, get some dogs." And they say, "Well, dogs don't work." So I don't know.
Our dog works. We have a full-blooded Australian Shepherd. It's actually our son's dog. We have him in the fenced-in area, and he keeps the bears out.
Yeah. So there. So what do you want? Deer or dogs?
Yeah, I think,
Dogs don't eat the leaves.
That's right. Yeah.
Have you ever dealt with quack grass? I don't know, you might call it more like, it grows like Bermuda grass, but
It's bigger relieved, bigger, broader, but it kind of crawls the same, got nodes and all that. You know, Bermuda grass is probably one we have that is more like that, but it's just a finer leaf. And, you know, our best thing with that is cultivation, is what we've done. But, you know, in our systems for our orchards, it doesn't work because it eventually takes over. Because for vegetables, yes.
we have blueberries.
Okay.
So with a tree, you got one trunk, and you can kind of cultivate around it. With blueberries, you got about 10 stems coming up in that clump.
Gotcha.
And that quack
Comes
grass
right up in there.
Gets right up in there. And her husband used to use Roundup.
Sure.
And, you know, it might have worked for a while, but it's bad. And
Yeah.
we wanted to
Yeah, so you'll have probably if you're not using something like that, it's going to be a battle pretty, all the time.
I've tried some of those organic sprays that claim to kill grasses, but the problem is you've got new blueberry stems coming up, and you'd be killing those.
That's why I say that with those kind of things, your perennials you just aren't going to control your perennials with like a flame or like these. Suppress these acids. They're going to kill just the green leaves, but yeah, the rest. So my cultivating has been the main thing I've been able to control Bermuda grass with. Just keep it cultivated. Yeah. I don't know if it's the same thing.
If we're going to do a new area, we could do that.
Now I've used fabrics, plastics, but if anywhere there's a hole, they're going to grow. It's going to find its way up through there. And but I've done that in my orchards. I've done some fabrics in my orchards. Mainly that's for my vegetables, but that's just temporary. That's not long term like your blueberries. And so
We've decided we're just going to have to control it best we can and live with it.
mowing it. So my orchards I mow, and I just mow. I just keep it. Yeah, and I just when they're older, when they're younger, I try to keep it better controlled because it's too much of a competition. Yeah, exactly. So I try to mow it like those mowers you saw in here. That goes right around the tree, and it just works. It's on a spring, so it's on a wheel. So it rolls when it hits the trunk. The wheels roll, and it pulls back, and then it springs back. And then as you come the other way, it cuts the other side.
But you
So
have to wait till the tree is a little bit more mature.
yeah, well, I've seen a neighbor of mine that has sprinkler pipe that's too soft to take the mower. So he took another piece of pipe, bigger, and pounded it over the top and made it strong. Or you could, if I was thinking about putting a stiffer stake against on both sides of the plant. So a pipe, something like that, so it wouldn't knock it over. It would hit the pipe first and then go around it. That's one thing I consider doing if I was putting in a week.
If you've been doing this for many years, why are you replanting? I mean, why is there a life expectancy on these trees, and after like 20 years, you just tear out everything out and start in?
Yeah, so some of our orchards, the oldest orchard we took out was 50 years old on prunes. 40 years old. We machine pick, so I'm thinking that's probably partly why we're having a lower life, maybe 30 years now, 25 years. It could be various aspects. I kind of wrestle, because some of mine, we get some diseases, so they get some of their different ages that are dying. And
So sometimes, rather than just ripping a whole orchard out and having no income, we just replace trees little by little.
So that's where you saw where our backhoe, I'll go out and so I got several dead ones out there. I'll just replace those, leave the big ones. So now I've got all ages.